Welcome to the Alternative Dog Moms podcast. I'm Kimberly Gauthier, creator of Keep the Tail Wagging. I've been blogging about raw feeding, pet wellness, and life as a crazy dog mom for more than 10 years. I've seen massive improvements in my dog's health since I began raising my dogs naturally, and I'm passionate about sharing my experience to help other pet parents.
I'm Erin Scott from the Believe in Dog podcast. For more than 10 years, I've been researching and learning everything I can about healing cancer, allergies, autoimmune, and mystery illnesses in both my dogs and myself. And I can't wait to share with you everything I've learned in case it could help you too. As the Alternative Dog Moms, Kimberly and I are bringing you all the latest dog health news that we're following and the brilliant people we're meeting along the way. Now let's get started. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Erin.
So, do you remember a couple years ago, and I went to Dr. Kosher's event and I saw Dr. Kendra Pope, and I came back and I was like the biggest fangirl, and I was like, oh my God, we have to have her on the podcast, because that is like my experience with our guest today. I saw today's guest speak in Williamsburg a couple months ago, and as soon as I got home, I was like, oh my God, we have to have her on the podcast. I'm your biggest fangirl. Welcome, Dr. Katie Woodley.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm so glad you found it very helpful. It's great that you were there.
I took so many notes. I have the handout you gave me. I'm so excited to talk to you today. And I know from your talk that you have this really personal story of how you got into holistic wellness. So did you always start out wanting to be a vet and then sort of stumble into this holistic space?
Yeah, so great question. So I knew I always wanted to be a vet. I think a lot of vets you hear that from, right? We're always attracted to animals. I had a lot of like medical science background in my own family. My mom was a nurse practitioner. She attracted all the like animals to our doorstep. And I just really resonated with being more in touch with the animal side versus like human medicine side. Ironically, you obviously have to deal with the person too on the veterinary side. But one of the things that I didn't realize was out there was the whole holistic side. I've always been more of like a clean eater, like one with nature, all of those things. But I really went through my own personal health journey. I went to vet school in New Zealand and met my husband there. He's not a vet, but he's a Kiwi. And we ended up moving back to the States a couple years after I graduated. And 6 months after moving back, he got sick. So he actually was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD. And that's where our journey really began, because we were pretty healthy. We were very active. We ate very clean. We lived on a lifestyle property in New Zealand, had gardens. We raised our own sheep. However, something went massively wrong, and his body decided that it wanted to attack itself. And going to gastroenterologists is similar to a lot of pet parents who go to the veterinarian and ask about like food and supplements and all those things. And a lot of times, unfortunately, we tend to get shot down, right? And it's really frustrating. And we experienced that with our gastroenterologists. So we were told there's nothing you can do. Food doesn't matter. This is a gut disease, right? And good luck. Immunosuppressives are the only thing that can potentially help. And usually they end up not working, and they can have serious side effects, like they can actually kill you. And I wish I was exaggerating, right? But I'm not. And I was like, wait, this is not right. And so I went home and I went into the Google rabbit hole, as we all do, right? And know very well, and realized there's a whole other world of medicine out there that just isn't talked about. And so, of course, that gastroenterologist didn't know. And that's where I also realized too on this journey that I was doing the exact same thing to my own like patients and clients, where I was telling them at end stage disease, there was nothing else we could do for them. And it had never resonated with me. And it still makes me sick to think that that was part of my story. But it really encouraged me to become acupuncture certified, Chinese herbal medicine certified, dive more into the nutritional, get certified in those areas and learn about fresh food, food therapy, and just really go on this expansive journey of making sure that I had tools in my toolbox so that I really never had to say, there's nothing else you can do. Even if it's something where my lack of knowledge around that area, I know that we have this world of amazingness that I can always refer other people to my colleagues or say like, this isn't in my toolbox, but you can go there. So Yes, it was hard and it's still a journey and there's still ups and downs with, my husband and autoimmune disease. But because I was able to learn and grow and better understand how the body is connected to the mind, is connected to the ecosystem, the emotional health side, detoxification, all of those things, it makes it much easier to manage. And we're in a much better place today. And now I get to support pet parents with a whole different way with my own business, The Natural Pet Doctor.
So I just love that story so much. And I feel like Kimberly and I have even talked about how like our own personal health journeys is like so intertwined with what we have learned about for our pets too.
Absolutely. I mean, I spent the weekend watching your YouTube videos. And one of the things that just like I was celebrating as I'm listening to them, my friend would call it, it's a private joke where when I leave her voice memos and she was like, oh my God, I was shooting you so often as I'm listening. And she means shouting, but autocorrect. So I was shooting you as I'm watching your YouTube videos. And the big thing that got to me was one, people throwing everything at the wall. You're trying to figure out what's going on with your animal and you hear all of these great things. And I think people do it to themselves as well. I think TikTok is really one of those where it's like, where I'm seeing people right now, the big thing is magnesium oil. So everyone is using magnesium oil for everything. But I have yet to see a TikTok that talks about the side effects or can you use too much or anything. But everyone's into this get rich quick type of thing, but with health. And that was another thing that you covered in a video where you talked about, we make the mistake of assuming that we're going to see automatic good, a reversal basically of what's going on, where that's not necessarily the case. And I think after all these years of us feeding raw and learning about our dog, learning about ourselves, it's come to me that anything that's going to be natural is going to take time because not only are we undoing the damage that it took time to get there, but we're also rebuilding a new foundation. And then, of course, the third thing, and this is why I see why Erin was nerding out. I mean, after she goes to an event, I get a series of text messages of what she wants to do. She gets so excited. And as I'm listening to this, I'm like, okay, I get it. But the third thing was raw feeding isn't the cure for everything. And you were talking about that with allergies, where their dog has itchy skin. They heard about raw feeding. They switched to the raw diet, but oh, my dog's still itching like crazy. And it's just like, yeah, because it wasn't necessarily a diet issue. It was a gut issue. And not to say that raw feeding isn't a superior diet, but if you're not going to start healing the gut, raw feeding can only take you so far. And I learned that personally with one of my dogs. And thankfully, because of that lesson, I was able to immediately fix or help another dog because I knew exactly what to do. And I knew it wasn't leaning solely on the diet. So that's all. I'm just I'm impressed.
I mean, so many people get stuck, right? Not to their fault. It's just they're doing the best that they can. But the problem with our healthcare system is, Amazon kind of ruined it for all of us where it's now hour delivery and you're like, if it's not here in an hour, this is not good enough. And it's your health, we think it's we're like Amazon where, we're going to take this supplement and all of a sudden we're going to fix ourselves immediately. And I love how you brought up Kimberly, it took time to get there.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to have patience. I include myself in that and I catch myself because I'm aware of it now, but it takes time to heal. And I always say the healing journey, because even with flare-ups, especially with a lot of chronic health issues like gut and skin health, I work with that every day, all day, and there's going to be flare-ups. Mm-hmm. But when we understand how everything is interconnected, you can take a step back when there's a flare-up through this process and go, okay, what shifted? What might have changed?
Yeah.
Okay. And we better understand what we need to tweak and adjust then versus throwing it all out the window, starting all over and trying all the things again, right? And saying we failed.
Yeah. And again, that's another thing that you said. And this is something that I've gotten from 2 videos. I mean, it's I would have loved to watch more, but just from 2 videos, I was just like, yes, this is so brilliant. And it's so true. And you wrap this stuff up again in 2 videos, less than 15 minutes each, things that took me years to figure out. But going back to the flare up is, people will sit there and assume that, okay, it must be the diet. Maybe it's this supplement. They'll add 5 more supplements to throw out the whatever food they bought and bought a whole new brand. Because I've spoken to people who do this, and all the time it was a stress situation. You moved that week.
Yes.
And your dog's under a tremendous amount of stress. And that's what the problem was.
Yes, definitely. One of the cases that I also had too that really opened my eyes up, and I've talked about it in some of the YouTube videos, was a dog that was scratching all the time, and they had tried allergy meds. They did the Apoquel, Cytopoint, they did all the things, right, from the conventional side, but they had also tried like all the raw food diets and tons of supplements too. They had a supplement graveyard, just like many of us have had. And we did some testing because I'm a big fan of test, don't guess, because then you have a much better idea of where weaknesses or imbalances are. And this dog had the most heavy metals I've ever seen. And I was like, this is a huge resistance to you healing your pet. We're treating the wrong thing. And so it was really eye-opening, and it took time, and it's taken time, and there have been ups and downs, but that dog is much more stable now. And we're not using the traditional like yeast protocols and all the things that everyone goes down that path. Yes, yeast can come with heavy metals, but that was really eye-opening of we need to be open to looking at what are all the factors of these symptoms to figure out the why for why the symptom is actually there, and then create the treatment for that symptom, right? Versus the other way around.
Yeah.
So I actually had written something down in my notes that you said that stress alone can cause leaky gut. That was shocking.
It's like what Kimberly just said, right?
And isn't it funny, because isn't it interesting that I'm curious to know how many like dogs within the rescue system, because those of us who adopt dogs, and then there's is it the 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months where we're allowing them to become acclimated into our families. But it is a stressful situation, especially, you don't know what their background is. But like, for instance, Bella, she came from someone who was taking advantage of the pandemic puppies. And she claimed that Bella was an accidental litter, but I've met people who have her older siblings from different litters. So it's like, nope, not accidental. Just people stopped buying puppies. But, she and all of her siblings, and same with the other siblings that are older, all have levels of anxiety. So I'm sure that the situation that they were growing up in was very anxious. I've read that dogs can take on the anxiety of their mother in utero, but all of those things, and then coming into, they came from California, so they came up in a transport, all of that adds to the stress. And then we wonder why they have digestive issues. So one of the first things I started working on with her was her gut health, because I knew that was going to be a potential issue. And I had the same experience, but just not as extreme with Apollo when he joined me.
Yeah. I mean, your gut brain axis is really important, right? And you can have, it's like this vicious cycle where you have the brain speaking with the gut through the vagus nerve. So if we have anxiety and stress, yes, there's a communication there. And then we also have, if we have dysbiosis or an imbalance in the gut bacteria, the microbiome, or inflammation or problems there, that's also speaking back up to the brain. So you have this cycle that's always occurring. And I think one of the things too that is important to bring up is when we talk about like our stress and our pets mirroring these and absorbing our energy, there's a natural tendency to shame and feel guilt and all of that stuff as humans. And we have to remember we're doing the best that we can. The world's a crazy place, especially, the past couple of years. Stress is a normal, natural thing. I think the biggest thing is becoming aware of it is the key. So if we find that we're really, really stressed out, what tools do we have to be able to take care of ourselves that will then also help our pets? I always talk about tea. I'm a tea freak. It's a New Zealand thing, but I absolutely love teas. And tea is a really easy way to like chamomile tea is like my favorite. Have a cup of tea and then maybe put a little bit in your like dog's food too to help calm everyone down. And also as a moment of check-in, because leaky gut. So when that gut gets inflamed, bacteria, food, toxins can pass through, stimulate the immune system, and create a whole host of other issues that don't seem related to a gut health problem, like behavior problems, skin issues, hot spots, ear infections, chewing on the feet. Those are really common problems. But if we can kind of break that cycle and provide other tools and resources to help calm that pattern down, it can make a huge difference for ourselves and for our pets, because leaky gut's a huge problem. And if stress is creating that, just becoming aware of how we're feeling and what's going on in our environment can make a huge difference.
So you had talked a lot about the different tests, and there's so many different tests out there on the market. So are there ones that you suggest starting with, or like a protocol that you suggest? Because you can end up spending like thousands of dollars on all of these tests.
Yes.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to ask, because it's like, and can you just like explain like when it comes to the test, because we have the animal biome, we have innovative pet labs, we have
Parsley Pet.
Parsley Pet. So Parsley Pet, the blueprint testing of Parsley Pet. There's
Yeah.
all of these tests. Can you also explain when, like, give us kind of an example of when we would go to one versus the other?
Yes. And it's not always straightforward, just like anything, right? So makes it super confusing. There's a lot of tests on the market, and my opinions based on my personal experience and knowledge may differ from like some of my other veterinary colleagues too. So keep that in people's minds. Like, some of the things I say might be a little bit different, but what I found to be really helpful with my clients and patients is I typically, in the program that I have, I start with a hair tissue mineral analysis test. And so that's like the Parsley Pet. I create my own plans. I send it off to analytic research laboratories for the testing. There's 2 labs in the US that you want those companies. If there's a company you're partnering with, like Parsley Pet or a veterinarian, ask them what lab they're using. You don't want to wash the fur sample beforehand because it can alter the results. So these are questions that pet parents should be aware of to ask the company or the veterinarian. The reason I start with that one is, for one, it's easy. It's non-invasive. It's just a fur sample. And so it's literally a tablespoon of fur, but what it does is it looks at the last 3 months of cellular health. It's one of the few tests that we have too that looks at heavy metals. Every pet, every human has heavy metals. So I've never seen a pet never have them. They're there. So the question is how well are they tolerating toxins and detoxifying? So that's really key. The other thing I like about that test is it's showing us how well are we digesting and absorbing vitamins and minerals and nutrients. Whereas like that nervous system what are the adrenals doing, kind of thyroid, endocrine health overall. It's not specifically checking thyroid hormone or cortisol, but we're looking at the different ratios of these nutrients to then assess what's happening at that deeper level in the body. So it's very, very powerful and helpful, and has really helped me guide pet parents for their treatment options. So I'd probably start there because it's so comprehensive and covering a lot of these areas that are tied into gut health because everything's interconnected. Now, where I'd probably go from there, this is kind of like a split, is we have animal biome, which is a microbiome test. So this is going to look at the specific types of bacteria that are present in the gut. So we're looking to see, is it well balanced? Do we have a lot of diversity? Is there an imbalance of good versus bad bacteria or dysbiosis, overgrowth of things like pathogenic bacteria like E. coli? So it's going to give us an idea kind of how well are the microbes doing. Now, where it can fall short is the functional side. And also, too, the microbiome area, there's a lot of research being done, but this is a new area of medicine. So there's a lot of unknowns. They're not able to test like the trillions of different types of microorganisms. We don't fully understand how they all interact and work together, too. So we have to keep that in mind when we get those test results back. The other test that I run a lot is Innovative Pet Lab stool test. So animal biome microbiome test is a stool test. So this is a test that pet parents can order on their own, which is great. And then we have Innovative Pet Lab, which is also a stool test. Now, the difference with this test is that it's a functional medicine test. So what it's actually looking at is kind of how the gut's working. So I see a lot of pets come to me and they've done like 1,700 gut restore capsules, like fecal transplants. And they're like, why? Why is it not working? And I'm like, huh. Okay, well, let's think about things, right? Like the microbes aren't happy. They're not staying where we need them to stay. They're not repopulating. So why is that? So we have the rest of the ecosystem, the environment that we need to be looking at. And that's why I like Innovative Pet Lab tests, because it puts the pieces together. So it's not testing specific bacteria, but it's going to be looking for like leaky gut. Do we have inflammation? So calprotectin is a biomarker that's been thoroughly tested and researched. And what I love about Innovative Pet Lab is they came from the human side, from Genova Labs, and they've created reference ranges for dogs and cats. So there's a lot of research actually out there about these biomarkers. So we can see, do we have leaky gut? So inflammation in that gut lining. Are we reacting to gluten? This one's fascinating, by the way. So even pets who are technically on a gluten-free diet, I've had a couple recently that did this test and sky high levels. And I was like, that's fascinating, right? Always questioning. That's what I'm like, that's interesting.
My friend had this happen with her dog recently.
Really?
She freaking out because her dog was from a raw, like naturally reared line. She owns a pet food store. Her dog has never once eaten gluten or anything, and it was extremely high for gluten. She's been freaking out. So that's so funny you mentioned that.
So first places I go, right? Treats. So, and especially like, and even food companies, right? If they're not testing for gluten, we don't know, especially if it's being made with other companies like food products, we don't know if there's cross contamination. So the other thing is treats and supplements, especially chewable supplements, because that's where we look for inactive ingredients and other things on the ingredient list. And if it doesn't say gluten-free, we can't assume it's gluten-free.
Wow.
So this is, and I had a client also, they have a baby and she's like, no, they're on gluten, but they got a couple pieces of spaghetti. And I'm like, oh, God bless you guys. Like there's probably more going into the dog's mouth, but you're doing the best that you can, right? Like, we can only do the best that we can at times, but those are the things that I'm looking for and asking. Something's happening to trigger that immune system to create an antibody against gluten. Now, if your pet's experiencing like health issues, this is really important because finding that source of gluten and removing it could fix your pet. And if your pet seems nice and healthy and normal, this is really important still because we're all on a spectrum of health where we have disease at one end, health at the other, and we're all constantly moving along it every single day. We don't want to keep moving towards the disease end of the spectrum by like stimulating the immune response, creating inflammation because there's gluten, because eventually the body will break. And then we end up with like a diagnosed disease. We don't want that. So that's a really important biomarker. Also, if you're feeding kibble, this is a great test to do because you want to see, is my pet reacting to the products that are making up the kibble? So this is a really, really good one to take a look at. The other thing that it's going to look at is how well we're digesting. So looking at some enzymes where how well is the pancreas working? Because then that can give us an idea of like, oh, we have a low marker. We can supplement with digestive enzymes. Great. Now we know we probably actually need this versus just throwing everything at our pets because we think we should. The other thing too is it's going to look at the local immune system. 70% of your pet's immune system is within the gut. And so this test, just from a simple stool test, will actually look and see, is your pet overreacting to something? So this is secretory IgA, or is it underreacting to something? Because a lot of pets with chronic gut health issues, skin problems are underreacting. So using simple things that are going to help naturally support that local immune system, colostrum, medicinal mushrooms, Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a beneficial yeast, all have amazing research to show that this can naturally boost that local immune system and even calm down an overactive one. Now, if it's overactive or like parasites, what's going on? Is there giardia? Do we have a food sensitivity? So it's really powerful to give us the full picture of what's going on. So if I had to pick and choose, so let's say I had to pick hair tissue tests because it's so comprehensive looking at everything. And then I'd probably do innovative pet lab because it's going to tell us like the function of the gut. And also too, another biomarker I didn't mention on their comprehensive panel is beta glucuronidase, which is a lot of times going to show us if we have, say, like a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, because when we have an overgrowth of microbes, they produce toxins and other factors that then show up as this biomarker elevating in the stool. So we can get an idea if like there is a microbiome issue from the IPL test. And if you're seeing that, and especially if you're seeing symptoms and you're getting stuck, then I would definitely do an animal biome test too. Now, if you can do all three, fantastic. It gives you more information. So, but starting there, and then of course, don't forget your basic tests with your vet. Like, don't just jump straight to like the functional medicine test. You still need CBC. So your blood work, CBC, biochemistry, please make sure they add a thyroid on. That's a T4 at the bare minimum, because that is missed more times than I ever see. Like it's insane. And thyroid issues are very common, especially because we have a lot of toxins. We have dysbiosis, microbiome issues, and that impacts the endocrine hormone system too. So once again, it all is interconnected, but these tests are going to be helpful. Yes, we spend money up front, but it's going to help eliminate like throwing everything at the kitchen or, at the wall and hoping it sticks, right? The spaghetti at the wall analogy, because then you can pick and choose what your pet actually needs. And then you can retest and see if it worked and then take them off the supplement. And then down the road, proactively do a yearly test and see how they're doing and adjust your supplement list and your support system from that information too. So that's what I essentially teach and support pet parents with, because ideally having a bowl full of supplements is not the way we want to go for the rest of our pets' lives or our lives. And it adds up tremendously cost-wise too.
Yeah, I was thinking, even though those tests up front can be pricey, like how much money have you spent on supplements that you've end up, like you say, in the supplement graveyard over time, that didn't work, or switching to all these different brands of food? It's like, it's kind of like you're paying it one way or the other anyway. So at least actually get answers.
Well, and two, the other thing I was going to say real quick, a lot of people repeat the same tests over and over again. Like the stool test looking for parasites and Giardia, like they just keep repeating the same test. And I'm like, we've laid that one to rest. Like we got to test something else. Like this is not, infection is not the problem. Like we need, and that's where the beauty of having access to these other functional medicine tests is really helpful. So rather than spending the money on the fifth, like parasite test, do a different stool test that gives you different information so that you can rule in or rule out something else.
And for people who have multiple dogs, I often hear people want to save money by testing one dog, assuming all of the dogs, since they're eating the same diet, they're living in the same home, that they're all going to have the exact same things going on. Can you explain why that may not be the case?
Each pet is an individual. So this is where, a great example, we don't talk enough about mold. I'm seeing so much more mold in my patients because we're looking, and mold sucks. Like mold's worse than yeast, by the way. I know they're like very similar, but the problem is when you think about, like, for myself, for example, myself and my husband actually are a great example, right? We live in the same household. We work together. We have the same stressors. We're with each other like almost 24/7. God bless the man. And we have, same environment, exposure to toxins outside. What else? Everything's the same. And he can't eat certain foods and I can. So like we've been together over, it's like almost 20 years. So like there's a long enough history where just because we have the same environment, my genes are different. Genes are not everything, by the way, but they play like 10%. My microbes are different. We've done some functional medicine tests. My microbiome is different. The way my genes express are different. The way I manage stress is different. So that's the other thing. Each pet is still an individual. Now, we do a lot of testing on pets in the same household, and it's always fascinating because I do find, especially looking at heavy metals, looking between two different like dogs in the same household, they can be a lot of times very similar, yes, on a hair tissue mineral analysis test, but more times than not, I see big differences. And it comes down to that because we're all very different in how we process things. So for going back to the mold example, it's like, you can be living in a moldy house and you have someone who doesn't have the markers for processing mold properly and they're building up the toxins and they feel sick all the time, where the other person is like, just get over it. What's wrong with you, right? Like, you're just a baby. You should tolerate this. Like, it's fine. And that's what's happening. And so same with our pets. And that's why that if you need to space out testing, then do that. But rather than like switching the diets, doing all the supplements, trying all the different things, have a plan. And that will save you money over the long term. And also, when you know that you're treating the actual thing, it will save you money in the long run because you'll actually be fixing the problem versus hoping that it gets fixed.
One of the other things that really blew my mind that you had spoke about was about the liver and the process of detox. And we have all heard like, oh, milk thistle is, great for helping detox the liver. I have also heard, oh, you should feed the sprouts, right? Like that was something from when the Forever Dog first came out a couple years ago, the first book, it was like the big takeaway was like, oh, you should grow the sprout. I didn't realize, and you explained it so well, like why they need both of these things because they're supporting different parts of the detox process. And I was like, oh, mind blown. I had no idea.
Yes, there's different phases of detox. And, the other thing too, detox is like a buzzword, right? Like everyone's like, you should detox. And then you hear also too, like, we need to detox like once a year. And I'm like, but we're detoxing every day, every single second, right? So we need to be thinking about like the environment, the things around us, once again, not to create fear or overwhelm, but just to become aware of what's going into our bodies from, things like plastics, what's in the water. Flea and tick products commonly get like overlooked too. I see a lot of delayed reactions when a flea and tick product is given, or even heartworm medication. I'm not saying not to use them, but have a conversation with someone on other natural remedies or also to your personal situation and environment also. I live in Colorado and I still have people come to me that are using these products year round, and you don't need to. There's a seasonal issue. So these are very important topics. So going back to the phases of detoxification, I always start with like, you want to be thinking about remove or reduce the amount of toxins, right? So these different phases that we start with, always start there, or otherwise you're just constantly filling the bucket and it's overflowing. We also need to be thinking about how do we actually detox? So the gut is a huge detox organ. It is connected to the liver. It's also connected to the gallbladder, which is producing bile. Bile is going to help break down the fats. It also has antibacterial properties for the gut to help the microbiome stay nice and healthy. So the other thing with the gut too is that there is a connection directly to the liver through the portal vein. And what can happen if there's constipation, or if there's an overload of toxins in the gut, they can actually get recirculated through that vein back up into the liver, and then the body has to reprocess it. Not a fun thing, right? And if there's too much inflammation in the liver's working harder, can push toxins out into the bloodstream. So for anyone here, it's probably easier to see personally yourself, but if you have a pet where you feed them and they get like more inflamed or red, or like for yourself, you don't feel good, you get really itchy after eating, that's a sign that your liver's working harder because toxins are getting pushed back out into the blood. You're having an excess histamine response. When you see that, we have to support the liver. So those are a couple key things to clue you in to kind of think about, is my pet or myself detoxing well? But that first process, so let's think about when toxins come into the liver to be processed, the first process is actually what we call like activation of those toxins. They're fat soluble. And what's happening is the body is actually making it more toxic. I'm going to repeat that for everyone in the back. The first step of detox is to make the toxins more toxic. We do that through things like, certain like vitamins, minerals. B vitamins are essential, zinc, vitamin E, This is where like milk thistle can be helpful, right? Think about that. If all we're giving is milk thistle and we're converting more toxins into more toxic, we need to know about the rest of the processes to make sure they're working properly, or things get stuck. They get backed up and more are going to keep coming in. And the body's like, whoa, this is too much. And we have detox reactions. We see inflammation increase. We see more itchiness. Ears get inflamed. All sorts of things go wrong. So that's the first step. So fat soluble, we're turning it into a fat soluble compound. Next process in the liver is what we call conjugation. So this is through like things called like sulfation. We're using methylation. We don't need to go into all those details. Essentially, what I want people to remember is we're taking fat soluble toxins, we're turning them into water soluble so we can get them out of the body, out of the liver, pass it through into the urine, pass it into the gut, so that then hopefully it can be excreted out. This is also where we need things like selenium, zinc, B vitamins. This is also where your sulfur foods are really important. So you mentioned your sprouts, right? Your broccoli. Like these would be where your whole foods are going to be really helpful to help support this process. Because once again, a lot of pets and people, their phase 2 is not working well, and toxins are getting stuck between phase 1 and phase 2. And that's why we should not see detox reactions if the pathways are all open and working and flowing very smoothly. So then we go to phase 3. Phase 3 is all about getting it out, elimination. This is where I talk a lot about binders. So binders are the things that are going to grab onto those toxins and help eliminate them out of the body. So looking at things like activated charcoal is a really well-known binder, very universal, very easy to access. It can be constipating. It turns the stool black. That's a normal thing of that product for people to be aware of if you use it. But we want to help support the body getting it out so it doesn't get recirculated through the portal vein back into the liver. So when we think about this, there's a company called Quicksilver on the human side, and they've coined the term push catch, which makes sense, right? We're pushing toxins through and we're catching them to eliminate them out of the body. So we want to be thinking about these things. So getting the elimination process working, that's where your gut health is really important. Fiber is also another really important binder for toxins, heavy metals, things like that to get it out. And it's also a food source for the microbes, because those are also going to be playing a part in detoxification too. They're doing a lot of different things. So zeolites, clinoptilite. So ion gut is a common product out there. That's a gentle binder that's also healing leaky gut and binding to things, toxins like glyphosate. So there's a lot of great products out there now on the pet side, but we have to be thinking about how do we reduce the toxins, and how do we make sure all these pathways are flowing nice and smoothly using either supplements, nutraceuticals, or fresh food to help support those areas.
That's like the best explanation that I've ever gotten of that. Again, like Kimberly said, she's an accountant. I'm a paralegal. We're trying to figure all this out for ourselves, and, have spent 10 years or more trying to figure this out. And it's like, oh, thank you.
You're welcome. It's taken me a while too as a veterinarian. We're all in this together, right?
So one of the other things that you've talked about that I don't know that I've ever heard anybody else talk about are the peptides. And remember, Kimberly, we saw something at Super Zoo that said peptide, and I'm like, we have to go check this out. Because that you were the first person I've ever heard really talk about this.
Yeah, peptides. Your magic pill. No, it's not, by the way. It's not. But that's the thing. Like, one of the things that I hesitate with talking about this is that it can seem like a magic pill. So as a background, peptide therapy has been around on the human side for a much longer time. It's actually being researched back in the 80s in Russia for the Russian army to keep them like moving and working well and able to like fight for their country. So there is a lot of research around this, and there's a lot of research done in mammals and especially with rodents that we can actually apply to our dogs. And even I use them in cats too. I've got my kitties on them actually. So this, and I take them personally too. So this is something where I'm a big fan of experimentation for myself. Obviously, for everyone here who's like, you're a case study of one. Yes, I am. But I like to see how I feel on certain things too, to gain clarity around potentially using it in pets. So take that for what it's worth, if it's worth anything. But peptide therapy is actually really fascinating. And when you start delving into the research around how you can use it, alongside a lot of the concepts we've already talked about, the results that I see with my patients are quite incredible. Now, once again, it's not a magic pill, and there are no magic pills, because peptide therapy, what it is essentially broken down proteins. So when you think about what is a protein, it's made up of different amino acids. So peptides, there's a lot of different types of peptides that are produced naturally in the body. They're being produced in the gut and elsewhere naturally. So there are synthetic and there are natural peptides. And one of the ones that I've talked about quite a bit that I use really frequently is the BPC 157. So what it stands for is body protection compound 157. Now, this is a naturally occurring peptide. It's 15 amino acids long. So each peptide will be a different length, doing different things. And what's really neat about these is that for BPC specifically, it's naturally produced in the gastric juices, in the stomach acid. So it's really resistant to being broken down by the stomach acid. Now, what does it do in the body? What it's going to do is it's actually going to communicate in the cell to help with transcription of DNA, to help produce anti-inflammatory mediators and chemicals to calm down inflammation. It'll help heal the gut lining. It actually goes to the brain. It's going to help with dopamine and serotonin levels also. So there's a lot of research around kind of calming down anxiety, the gut-brain axis, helping with, I call it brain on fire, where we have just so much inflammation in the body that we see anxiety, behavior problems, reactivity problems. Obviously, there's behavior components you want to like train with too. It's not all just like give a supplement and hope the behavior goes away. That's not how this works. But also too, healing the gut inflammation to create the optimal environment for those microbes. Very, very important. The other thing that it works really well with, which is a super frustrating, very common condition, is acid reflux. This is a game changer. And I use it pretty much for not every patient, because once again, every pet is an individual, but for many dogs that come to me with acid reflux issues, this is where typically we will see an improvement within 2 to 3 weeks. So it works very quickly. It's very safe. The other neat thing about peptide therapy is it does not interact with drugs, with other supplements, and it does not create food sensitivities. And you can give it the BPC, you can give with food or without food. A lot of these peptides work better if they are able to be given orally and they're resistant to stomach acid. Ideally, you want to give them 30 minutes before eating, so it's not being broken down. There are some peptides that are different than BPC that are broken down by stomach, like the gastric acid in the stomach. So there are injectable forms, but we have a lot of great options from different companies on being able to use an oral form, which makes it easier, whether it's in a capsule, a powder, or a liquid form. So BPC is really, really neat. Also, too, for pets with cruciate injuries, so ligament issues, muscle tears. It works really well for frozen shoulders in humans. Tons of research around that. It's incredible. I used it for my knee pain after running half marathon. I had severe knee pain and it went away in like 5 days. Not a miracle, right? Because once again, this is short term. Typically, what you do is you use it for like 3 months at most, and you take a break, like a month, use it, take a break for a week so the body doesn't adapt to it and where it doesn't work anymore. So you take a break, then you restart it, but it's not meant to be used long term. So this is something where your foundations are really, really key. So supporting the detox pathways, reducing toxins, feeding, less processed foods, optimizing digestion, helping with the emotional health side, reducing stressors. Because if we forget about all those things, and once again, we just rely on peptide therapy, you're going to be back where you were before you started it. So that's really, really important to think about, especially when you are using peptide therapy. But I really like it because it's well tolerated. There's another peptide called KPV that I use a lot, and that's more anti-inflammatory. It has antifungal properties too. So all those pets with the yeasty problems, bacterial infections, KPV complements that and works really well too. And then there's a few others, but those would be kind of the two main ones that I use a lot in my patients.
Yeah, this has all been so fascinating. This is like a whole brand new thing that I've been reading up on.
Yeah, it's really neat. And the thing is that like any supplement, right, you have to be careful with the brands you use and also the form of the peptide too, because there are some, it went on the black market, right? Anything with like the FDA, if it's going to help you and heal you, right? Like they come along and wreck it. I'll probably be taken away for that comment on your podcast. However, like the problem with the peptide therapy is it was like forced into like the black market to go underground. And the problem is whenever that happens, just like what we see in the pet industry, right? All the supplement lines and the poor quality supplements, poor quality foods, it's a free for all. And so you need to make sure that you're using high quality supplements. It's not a cheap supplement by any means. I mean, a bottle of it's going to cost you for 30 days, it's going to be like $150. So if you find a really cheap product, I'd be asking why, and I probably would not purchase it. And just because something's expensive, also on the flip side, does not mean it's high quality either. So you have to make sure that you're assessing the companies that you're using. Super happy to share, the resources that I use too. But that's something we always should be thinking about anytime we're using supplements and even, drugs and stuff like that and food, right? These are things we need to be thinking about.
So when it comes to, what you're doing, or I should just say, when it comes to raising our dogs, one of the things that gets to me is I was actually just wrote a post today. I got most of my information just trial and error, reading articles, reading books, and joining groups on social media. And not all of those are just the best ways to get information because things are changing. People are sharing their perspective, and the groups can be kind of like the wild, wild west when it comes to information. So for people who are new to all of this and they're looking to start improving their dog's health, what are some of the first things you recommend that they start focusing on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know I was overwhelmed when I first started on this journey, and I think I can probably speak to most pet parents I work with and people who come to me. There's just so much overwhelm. And when we're at the beginning of the journey, it's really important. And I think it's important like throughout the journey, but especially at the beginning, keeping it simple. So this is where picking like one or two things, three at most, that you're going to focus on. Now, I'm a big fan of optimizing diet first because, you can waste a lot of money on all the supplements. And I would rather people spend money on adding in more fresh, minimally processed food if they can. Now, I also recognize, because I usually am not the first opinion, maybe one day that will change. However, I work with some really sick, really sensitive pets. And using fresh food a lot of times can cause reactions. So when I say this, I am thinking about all those people where they're like, they've tried that and it didn't work. But I would say first try it. Like very, very important because it may be the thing that actually fixes everything else. And also if your pet's healthy and doesn't have symptoms, it will optimize health and it will help prevent other things from happening. Now, we can't prevent everything. We don't know. Like, I truly believe we're all here to learn and grow, and we have to experience certain things that are potentially predestined for us to go through. But that's maybe another conversation. But fresh food and minimally processed, even if it's just using superfood as toppers for a kibble, that is your first step. The other thing that I feel like in terms of helping is become more aware of your stress. Like this sounds like it has nothing to do with your pets. We talked about it a bit earlier. Kimberly, you mentioned it too. I have found, especially in the past few years, that if we just took a little bit more time to sit outside, to go for a walk, to put the phone down, the world would change. We'd be less reactive. We would be more in tune with what we actually need, and we'd actually be more in tune with how we actually feel. And so those two things right there, I truly feel like would change the health of so many people and so many pets. But the second thing I said is the most hard and the most difficult, but I had to throw it in there.
It's important.
It is. It is very important. And it's been a game changer for myself, is actually focusing on myself first and filling my cup first. Very, very important. Not always easy. I don't always get it right. And I give myself grace. The third thing I would say, if we had to pick three things, is assessing your environment and looking at where you can reduce or minimize things that could be creating inflammation. Because there's a lot of hidden things that we just don't realize. Like sometimes like the treats, right? We're like, they really like it though. And I see like a common thing I see is like kibble. They really like the kibble. This is a lot more common in cats, but it happens in dogs too, where like, oh, it's just a little bit of like a kibble treat or just a little bit of a topper. See if you can change that out for like a freeze dried option, even if it's dry. That'll help reduce and remove a lot of the chemicals and toxins. It'll be easier for them to digest because even tiny little amounts add up to a lot over time. I hear it all the time. A little bit of this doesn't matter, but it does. And especially if we're not optimized and we're not detoxing properly, if our stress levels are through the roof, we're running around like crazy people, like it does make a huge difference. And a lot of those things, especially the last two things, are free. They don't cost anything to do. And so, just to reiterate, more fresh food, minimally processed. Work on becoming aware of what you're feeling, your stress levels, and taking care of yourself. And your pets are part of that. Like my cats love like hanging out with me while I'm like grounding outside and just hanging out in nature. Like, if you're meditating, let your pets join you and absorb that beautiful energy. There's so many, have a cup of tea with your pets, like put the dried herbs down, let them self-select if they want to. Like there's so many neat things that you can do to help incorporate them into those routines, but just become aware of that and check in with yourself and give yourself permission to take care of yourself. And then the final thing is just become more aware of like where we can reduce, remove the things that aren't serving us, that might be increasing inflammation and creating resistance to healing and just living our best lives.
That's
oh my
amazing.
gosh.
Thank you.
This has been fabulous. Yes. Mic drop.
No, I wrote it all
That's
down.
what we're all here for, right? Like, what's the purpose of life if we don't enjoy any of it, right?
I get the hype now. I get the hype. I usually tease Erin when she nerds out and she fangirls out after an event. Of course, on our last episode, I was fangirling over the raw pet medics because they are just
I love
amazing
them.
too.
Oh
Yeah,
my gosh,
I mean, it's just like
them.
it's so fun because we follow you guys on social media and we see your content and the things that you're putting out there, and it's such great information, and it's so much fun just to talk to you today because again, I'm just sitting here like, yes, exactly. That's so important. There's just so many things that you've said today that I 100% agree with. And so I love it.
Yes. And if you don't agree, it's okay, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the beauty of life. Like we can all have different opinions and different ways of doing things, and we can celebrate all of that. And I think essentially that's lost in a lot of like the world. Like Kimberly, you mentioned like the Facebook groups, and like there's so much like shaming and guilt, and like people are told they're wrong and they're just trying to learn and to grow.
Yeah.
And I really do think if we all just kind of focused on some of those things I just mentioned, we'd all feel much more at ease and peaceful, and just like it'd be okay to have those conversations and just meet people where they're at to support them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I appreciate all you guys do to create awareness or for other people. And, I do things differently in my practice too to help people. And it's one of those things that I think scares people also is that increasing the exposure to this is very important. So if people don't have access to an in-person holistic integrative veterinarian, seek out those of us who are doing online work and supporting pet parents in like safe healing communities, where we can support you and guide you and help you along the way and help you interpret a lot of these tests we talked about. Like, it's complicated and it's not easy. And that's okay, but you don't have to do it alone. And that's something that's really important for people to realize. You don't have to struggle alone, and it makes it much easier to have a mentor and a guide while you're doing it.
And where can people find you and work with you?
Yeah, so they can go to thenaturalpetdoctor.com. I'm on social media, my YouTube channel. I kept it super easy, The Natural Pet Doctor. And I work with people in my Blueprint program, which is a lifetime mentorship program where we actually do the hair tissue mineral analysis test to help people figure things out, create a personalized action plan for them, and then really help them restore and then sustain overall health. It is geared for pets with gut and skin health issues. So really finding and healing the root cause and helping them really live their best lives along the way.
Wonderful. I'll make sure we have links for everybody in the show notes. All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.